So if you need to do that. So this is our second of 4 sessions, and I'm so glad you have joined us for this provocative book study. I'm Molly Arthur, a Society of the Sacred Heart Associate in San Francisco, California. And I welcome you all with our strong connections with the living reality of being the heart of Jesus in the, yeah, I'm working with doing the spotlight, figuring out how to do it. So this is a pilot. So we're going to start with a land acknowledgement, which has been written and will be read by Sister Toni Nash, our interviewer today. And our grounding today is based on a lovely 3-minute video about the Ordinasoni Thanksgiving prayer. And Mary will introduce it to open our hearts for our gathering together today. Toni, go right ahead.
Okay. So we begin by acknowledging the land itself as a living entity, whatever land you are on right now. The soil, the water, the air from which we are formed, and from which we too often separate ourselves. We acknowledge too that there has been violence, systemic, historic, and ongoing sometimes to allow us to be here. We acknowledge our ancestors, the indigenous peoples, settler colonialists, religious leaders, and all who have struggled with the legacy of settler colonialism, as well as the wise elders and teachers who have carried the message and done the work of restoring the land. We're all connected through time. And finally, we acknowledge that we're all part of the same metabolism, the processes that occur within living organisms to maintain life, and that as such, we are responsible for healing each other.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Toni. And Mary, are you ready for your delightful video?
Yes, I am.
Great.
So this video, which I'm about to play, I received this from Layla Stats. When I was in Canada this summer for several weeks, I attended a program that she was having, and she's a musician and filmmaker and activist. She's a Mohawk woman, and and the Mohawks are part of the Haudenosaunee larger confederation. And before they start any meeting, they have the tradition of asking one of the elders to say what they call the words before all else, which is to set one's mind in the right framework for the work or the process of that gathering. And these words before all else are an acknowledgement and thanksgiving to all the beings that support us.
Dietina Warado, ne ungwai sua. Itogari na yo tonga, ne ngwa niguna. Dietina Warado, na eti nistaha, johunjade. Itogari na yo tonga, ne ngwa niguna. Dietina Warado, ne gahnega sua. Itogari na yo tonga, ne ngwa niguna. Dietina Warado, ne gunjo sua. Da eto na yutoge nanangwa nigura. Dietina Warado na yotunduni. ta eto na yotohage nena gwa ni gura. Ta itina warado ne ono kwa sua. Ta eto gari na yotohage nena gwa ni gura. Ta itina warado ne asa ni gonda de kohogua. Ta eto gari na yotohage nena gwa ni gura. Ta itina warado ne wahya ni yota. Ta eto gari na yotohage nena gwa ni gura. Ta itina warado ne kundirio. Ta eto gari na yotohage nena gwa ni gura. Ta itina warado ne garunda sua. Ta eto gari na yotohage nena gwa ni gura. Ta itina warado ne zita ogua. Ta eto gari na yotohage nena gwa ni gura. Ta itina warado ne gayeri ni kawarage. Ta eto gari na yotohage nena gwa ni gura. Ta itina warado ne eti sotogo radiweras. Ta eto gari na yotohage nena gwa ni gura. Ta tsidawano warado ne tsidawatsia anje kene karakwa. Ta eto gari na yotohage nena gwa ni gura. Ta itina warado ne eti sota asta neka karakwa. Ta eto gari na yotohage nena gwa ni gura. Ta itina warado ne yordzisto kwaronyo. Ta eto gari na yotohage nena gwa ni gura. Ta itina warado ne deon kiadado. Ta eto gari na yotohage nena gwa ni gura. Ta tsidawano warado ne sungwaya dizo. Ta eto gari na yotohage nena gwa ni gura. Ta eto.
So beautiful. Thank you so much. And I guess I'm going to do a spotlight for the three of us. I'm going to introduce our co-hosts and briefly, because that's so immersive and beautiful and grounding. But right now, I do want to share just a few brief words about Mary and Toni, our interviewer today. So you've read about them in our emails and in our small website. And we had a wonderful visit this week on Monday about what Toni and Mary were going to discuss today. A pretty special time when you get a Catholic theologian and a PhD cosmologist start talking, particularly when they are vowed nuns as well. So a passion and revelatory thoughts and insights spark forth. Mary Frohlich, of course, is our author. She's an RSCJ and is sharing her expertise in theology with us in these special book sessions. And Sister Toni Nash, CSJ, a teacher for over 60 years, is a national lecturer, retreat director, and spiritual director. Toni holds a doctorate in philosophy and religion with a concentration in philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness. And she co-founded Sisters of Earth in 1994. So let's enjoy their conversation and feel free to put your questions in the chat during this time. And after the small groups, Mary will read through them and provide answers. And I just want to say that I put that in the email that, Mary Frohlich has been a Sister of Earth as well for some years. And she was, as far as I could see, very excited about seeing Toni's name on the list of being a friend showing up and said, let's have an interview together. So here we are. And Toni is really going to be our interviewer. And we're going to have a good amount of time to listen and talk. Thank you so much. And I'm going to disappear.
Well, thank you. Thank you for letting a Sister of St. Joseph crash your party. I'm delighted to be here. I'm going to put my questions in the chat as I ask them so that as Mary is answering them, you'll know what topic we're on, sort of. Okay. To begin with, in the chapters that we are talking about today, chapter 3, Mary talked about moving toward nature-centrism and away from anthropocentrism, toward a more participatory way of being with the Earth community. And she mentioned the new animism as a part of that. So my question is, Mary, could you say more about this new animism and why moving in this direction is so important?
Okay, thank you. Well, you said the key word, which is participatory. That the anthropocentrism tends to put ourselves in some kind of separate category, like that there's ourselves, and then that we're somehow different from and above and able to make use of everything else. Whereas the key concept here is that we are completely participant, and that we don't have it. We're not, in that sense, we're not special. I mean, that is, we can say that everybody is special or everything is special, but that we are a part of this much greater whole of the Earth community, and that is our well, we're interdependent. That is to say, we cannot exist without the participation of millions of other beings in our support system. And that the shift then in our consciousness is to live that way, to live as participants rather than as dominators or as some kind of special controlling category of beings. And the new animism, I think I talked to somebody, there was a question last week, so I did actually start talking about it a little bit last week, but just to go into it a little further. The concept of animism was, or that name anyway, was given to the indigenous spiritualities back in the 19th century, and it was not a complementary view of these indigenous spiritualities. It was the attitude was that the indigenous were primitive, and that this was a very, very naive and primitive attitude. But of course, this was being interpreted very much through the Western worldview, and so the attitude was that the indigenous peoples, or the primitive peoples, as they were called, thought that animals and mountains and streams and so on had souls. So, but that was projecting the Western dualism onto the indigenous peoples. That is, the Western concept was that there's the soul that's separate from the body, and so okay, well, these people think that all these creatures have souls. So. So it wasn't complementary, and for that reason, in more recent times, there's been a movement away from talking about, a strong movement away, actually, from talking about indigenous spiritualities as animistic, although that isn't true everywhere, actually. There are some places where people proudly call themselves animists. But anyway, it's just a question of terminology, and what is called the new animism is first of all, it's a re-evaluation of what, in fact, the indigenous spiritualities were really all about. And then it's reclaiming that, but reclaiming it in a totally, totally different context. That is to say, none of us are going to go back to living in the way that the indigenous people originally did. Even the indigenous people are not able to return to, in many ways, to many of the aspects of their original way of life. But the new animism is the recognition that we desperately need to move to a new version of the recognition that we are fully participant and live in mutuality with all the other creatures of the earth. So that what has been learned, and I mean, I'm not an expert on indigenous spiritualities, but so these are big generalizations, but that indigenous people live with a mentality of expectation and participation that expects to learn from and to enter into a kind of conversation with everything that they encounter. And so they have the openness to that. And what we find as postmodern people, which is what we are, postmodern Western people, is that that doesn't come naturally to us, but that we can cultivate in some ways elements of that kind of a way of being in the world, and that it's desperately needed both for our own mental and physical health, and very much so for the future of the Earth, the future of the Earth as a habitat, which is greatly in danger, at least as a habitat for human beings. It's probably a little much to say that we're going to kill off everything. That isn't true. Life is very persistent, and there will be life in the future. But whether that life will include humans or any of the major forms of life that we see now is really up for grabs. And that's because of the way that we have separated ourselves from this whole community and made ourselves, we de-animated it. I mean, so animism is to say this is alive. This is a living community, and all these beings bear that life and participate in that life. And the Western mentality is to de-animate everything. Even, and we've gotten a little better with the animals to recognize at least that the animals have life and sentience. But there was a whole period of time when that was even in question. It was like animals are just machines. They don't even have feelings. They don't even have they don't even feel pain. That was literally a way of thinking about animals for a period of time. So it's the reanimation of the recognition, or rather, of the animation or the life that flows through everything.
So what I'm hearing is that we're moving away from this human superiority and this dualistic thinking, that we're the only ones communicating, and we're more able to participate if we can think that we can communicate with the other beings on the planet. A second question that I have relates to when you talked about the insights of Gaia theory and symbiosis. They seem to talk about a deeper way of relating. Symbiosis, taking one organism into another, that's like a little closer than just friendship. It's a partnership. So my question is, how might these insights of Gaia theory and symbiosis deepen our understanding of the depth of relationship that is open to us in this web of creation?
Yeah, good question. Well, Gaia theory, first of all, is James Lovelock's theory that, based on, I mean, he is a scientist, and it is a scientific theory, even though there are also scientists who don't accept it. But it's the idea that all the processes that are going on, the life processes on Earth, are so interconnected with one another that they are operating like an organism. Now, he doesn't actually say that the Earth is an organism, strictly speaking, but he does say that they operate like an organism. For example, as organisms, our bodies are built to maintain certain equilibriums of temperature and of all the processes that are needed for us to be healthy, and that likewise the whole Earth does that. And the problem now is that we, as our human actions, are disequilibrating this incredibly well-balanced and resilient Earth, to the point where it's going to have to move to a totally different balance and we don't know what that's going to look like. And the process of getting there, as we're already discovering, is very destructive, for at least for us. I mean, it's very violent, I guess you could say. But both Gaia theory and symbiosis operate beyond our consciousness. I mean, that is, and I think that's part of what you're getting at with your question, is that when we think about relationship, often we do think about what we consciously participate in, and of course that's very important as in our relationships, that there's an element of consciousness, but that the level of our participation and the level of our interdependence and the level of our being created by all the beings and processes around us is far deeper than that level of consciousness, and it is far more vast as well. I mean, there's a certain sense, part of this, even, well, it's a whole different philosophy in some ways, that instead of individuals, there are emergent beings within a web, and that there's, in a certain sense, there aren't any boundaries. That is an individual. Obviously there are different levels, and there's a certain level at which, yes, I mean, I stop here and I'm not over there. There's a truth in that, but there's another truth in that there's elements of my being here that extend all the way in time and space, and are necessary in order for me to be here. So I'm an emergent being within this vast, really cosmic web of processes, and that's true of every individual being that we see. And also, when this connects up with Christology, it's the recognition that when we say that Jesus came as a human being, that he too, and his body and his participation has no boundaries, that everything is included in that, even though he was in fact a specific individual human being. But that if that is true, just like it is true for me or you, it is also true that everything is included, and that his incarnation is not just something that happened 2,000 years ago. It's involved in the entire process of the whole creation from the beginning and to the end. So that's one piece of it. I mean, the symbiosis is really interesting too, because what scientists have discovered is that we are in fact symbiotic beings ourselves. I mean, that is, we carry within us and on us millions of creatures. And even though, I mean, we take a shower every day and keep ourselves clean and everything, but we still are covered and permeated with these other creatures, and they need us and we need them. And that part of sometimes what is happening in the modern world is that people can be too clean. I remember even years ago hearing about how parents or children, I should say, who grow up in houses that are too clean and that are not exposed to dirt end up having much poorer health than children who play in the dirt and are exposed to many things. And so we've gotten too clean in some ways, and that even our guts, which depend the processes of our guts, I should say, which depend upon all these other creatures to help us digest our food and take it into our bodies, that it's being discovered that many of the illnesses of the modern person are probably partly, not necessarily completely, but partly a result of the fact that we have reduced the biodiversity in our guts. So anyway, we are symbiotic. And again, we don't know it. We don't see it. We don't think of ourselves that way. But actually, we are a community. I mean, physically, we are a community of beings.
You reminded me of the fact that sometimes I worry about the soap, the soap that's supposed to get rid of all the germs. We wash it off of our hands and then it goes in the ocean. And then it kills organisms in the ocean. So I start to worry about, I don't want to use that kind of soap. I don't want to kill off any organisms that might be essential, and I don't even understand their importance to us,
Yeah.
So another part of the what you wrote about really puzzles me, and this is a question from deep in me.
Mm-hmm.
You argued that the divinely given direction of evolution is toward beings that can manifest qualities like those of the divine heart. And when I thought about it, I thought, oh, that sounds like predestination, like some other God out there is in charge of how I'm supposed to be and act, and there's no free will. So I see a conundrum between the fact that we are moving toward we're progressing in some capacity to be godlike and loving, and how does this not just predestine us? My question, I guess I put it this way: how does this bring us any closer to a satisfying story of who we are as humans and who God is?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I can see the problem. I guess the way I see it is that love doesn't control, love embraces, but love does have a desire, I guess you could say, a desire for the loved one to to be happy, to be fulfilled, to be what they can be. And so it's not completely blank. I mean, it's not completely, doesn't matter. Now, one of the things I have to say is, I'm a theologian and I'm drawing on science. Science does have a different perspective. Science basically says that evolution is random, that there is no directionality to evolution. And so that you can't, at least in general, most scientists are very opposed to any, teleology, that is directionality or end goal in regard to evolution. Now, I don't know how theology can, and maybe some other theologian can do this, but as a theologian, I can't see how we can not have directionality in the sense that, again, the desire of love, or the intention of love, or it's not that I don't see how theology can simply say that there is no goal, no intentionality at all, or no direction. But the important thing, I mean, the distinction you're making is, predestination is a controlling kind of directionality. And it is very tricky, because it's very hard for us not to assume that the goal of evolution was to produce us. And I think in a way, it may be almost impossible for us to get that concept out of the back of our minds, that we're the big deal here. But that isn't, I mean, certainly science would say that is not true, that we are one of billions, really, of creatures that have been created, and that you could equally say that the purpose of evolution was to create any one of them, if you want to put them all on a line, because they all are emerging from the same process, and if they're present now, they have an equally long history. So it isn't that this directionality or intentionality necessarily produces us in the strict sense. But I do, I mean, I guess, again, I can't get away from the heart of God. If you know, my basic concept here is basic image, basic spiritual response is the heart at the heart of the world, and that so God is God is and the heart of God is what creates and moves the entire process of creation, and that does have a directionality, but it's a directionality that allows freedom, that allows the freedom, and is constantly experimenting. I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, the scientific point of view on evolution is that it's radically experimental, that it's like it's continually, the evolution is continually trying out all kinds of new things, and some of them they survive and thrive, and others don't. And so I find that as a great image of God, as the and of God's heart as this vast continual experimentation. But as I said, I do see it as having a direction. And that's a theological statement, not a scientific statement. But so yeah.
There are some scientists that would agree that rather than random, it seems that creation is moving toward greater complexity, like with Gaia theory, meaning organisms join with organisms to become more complex.
Mhm.
And when that happens, those organisms become more conscious.
Mhm.
So some of the scientists, Teilhard was moving in this direction, and then Thomas Berry and Brian Swim would state it as creation is moving in the direction of complexity and consciousness. And when you talk about the heart at the heart of the world, I hear that consciousness as being conscious of the loving relationship.
Mhm.
As a desire. It's like, yes, I begin to see the others around me and want to be more connected to them.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the question of what is love, what is a heart-like relationship. But consciousness, I mean, not all of it is conscious, but nonetheless, the greater capacity for consciousness. And I think doesn't Teilhard say consciousness, complexity, and communion, or something like that? Anyway, I thought communion. That's Thomas Berry, I guess.
Well, Teilhard said that the three overarching principles at work when creation makes things that are stable is that there will be interdependence or communion, he called it communion, subjectivity, and differentiation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which would be the complexity, I guess. So the differentiation would be complexity. The subjectivity is consciousness, and the communion is interdependence. Yeah.
When you talk about consciousness too, when you think about it, that's one of the things we're slowly putting into our accepted human ideas, that my dog has consciousness. It knows, it chooses to go to the window and bark when I'm almost home. You know, it knows that it's me. And so we acknowledge that some of the animals, even when you talked about the octopus, my octopus teacher, there's some sort of consciousness that was there that this octopus related. We don't know what it was or how to measure it, but that's not the important thing. The important thing is that there was enough awareness between the two organisms that they were conscious of each other.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
And that they became interdependent. And I mean, emotionally it seems like. Now we should that projection in a sense onto the octopus, but that its behavior suggested that it was really excited and interested in this relationship.
Yes. Real exciting. I Another part of what you talked about that brings up a conundrum for me is when we're talking about, we're kind of touched on it already. When we're talking about humans being the ones manifesting these qualities of heart, how does this not feed into our anthropocentric attitude, like we're best? And how does could it work against that humility that we have to develop in order to develop kinship?
Yeah. I mean, I think in some ways that's the trickiest part of this whole thing. And the first thing I should say is, I think it's probably impossible for us not to be, in a certain sense, anthropocentric, in the sense that we have no other place to see things from but a human one. I mean, that is it, and it's that humility to realize the limitations of that point of view that we have. So there is a kind of, just as if you've ever taken a walk with a dog, they're much more interested in other dogs than they are in people, and so they're seeing the world, they're dog centric, and likewise with any creature, they perceive and construct and enter into the world from that point of view. But it is also true that I know that the way I have written this, it does seem like or it can seem like it still seems kind of like, well, I'm saying, well, the emergence of humans was the main point. Again, I think as a theologian, I'm a little bit stuck in that perspective, because theology is a human enterprise, and in which we are trying to understand and explain and nurture our relationship with God, with the and with the creation, and that's the perspective that we're interested in, is where are we in all this, and it's so if you could have an octopus writing the story, it's true, it would look very different. But the octopus or the dog or the tree or whatever would identify different elements, probably, as to what were the key moments and the key developments. So yeah, I think there is an element of anthropocentrism in this. Again, the other piece, and I think I sort of alluded to this, but as a Christian theologian, we the core of our theology is that Jesus became human, and God became human in Jesus, and that is and that's how we identify that. I mean, we don't say that Jesus became an octopus or that God became an octopus. We don't know if God did, but anyway, that's not what we're dealing with, and when we're dealing with our particular tradition. So yeah, there is an element of anthropocentrism, and when does that? I think that what it means is that we have to constantly remind ourselves and work against that, to remember that it's a limitation as much as a strength to be in this particular body and this particular kind of way of being, and that the arrogance of that often seems to be intrinsic to being human, that we really have to continually work against it. So that we have to cultivate, when I say that, it seems like, and I don't want to romanticize indigenous people too much, because we're all human, and that's true of indigenous people in their struggles and so on, as much as anybody, but that it does seem as if indigenous peoples have an instinct more for a less anthropocentric way of being and of participating in the world. And that's now, that's probably because, and one of the reasons anyway, is because they are still in touch with the traditions of not only the traditions, but the way of being that humanity lived for its first 150,000 years of existence. I mean, the Homo sapiens is, I think, about 160,000 years old, and only 10,000 of those years have we had what we call civilization. Prior to that, the Homo sapiens lived in what we now call the indigenous way of life. That is to say, a largely hunter-gatherer life in which survival required a intimate knowledge of one's environment and of all the other creatures that were in that environment and how they behave and how one can build relationships with them. So it is instinctive to us. I mean, that is to say that even though we at the civilized, so-called civilized people have gotten so far away from it, the reality is that we were evolved as a species for that way of life. So in some ways, it's reclaiming our heritage.
Yes.
Rather than just creating something new or even claiming somebody else's heritage. I mean, we always have to be careful about not appropriating the indigenous spiritualities inappropriately. That is, pretending to be something that we're not. I mean, that is, we who are, as they say, settlers and newcomers, are not that. But on the other hand, there's a way in which it is also our heritage, and that's why we can talk about the new animism. I mean, the new animism is the attempt to figure out how people like us can reclaim that deeper heritage.
It strikes me when you're describing the indigenous attitude toward the rest of creation, the word that keeps coming to my mind is respect. Some woman theologian, who I can't remember her name right now, I apologize, said to a group of us one time that anybody who develops a hierarchy always puts themselves on top. So when you're talking about the humans kind of reflecting on who we are, we recognize our intelligence and we say, oh, the ones who have the most intelligence or consciousness or whatever, brain power, they're the ones that are most important. But Brian Swim used to keep reminding us, if the dogs were in charge of the hierarchy, they would say the ones with the best smellers were on top. And if the horses were in charge, they would say the ones with the most speed. So the attitude that indigenous people have toward every other being is one of, I wonder what gift they're best at. It's an attitude of respect, and that kind of would help make room for others than us, than humans, being at the top of the hierarchy.
Yeah, and I mean, basically, I'm moving from the hierarchical image to the network or web image. I mean, again, not to romanticize the indigenous, because in some cases they had their own hierarchy, or maybe still do. I don't know. But it is something that we need to rethink and find a better way.
I think this leads into the last question that I had. in chapter 5, you gave some really good examples of the problems that come up when we humans try to define something, when we try to put things in boxes. When we say, this is what we should be. We're too tame, we need to reclaim wild, and wild is, ooh, scary. Or this system is chaotic, and what it really means is we just don't understand it yet. And once we understand it better, it's like, oh, that's how it works. Okay. And then the same thing when you were talking about queer, we define what's okay and what's not okay, ignoring the fact that all of these other examples are actually out there and they don't fit in our boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
So I just am really alert to and want to know, how do we remain alert to questioning our cultural assumptions so that we don't make them a problem for developing kinship relationships. In other words, how do we get out of our superiority and respect other beings?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the whole, I mean, binaries, the mind works in binaries. I mean, I think that there is a way in which the mind works by saying, this is this and this is not. I mean, and there's a certain sense in which that fundamental way of working is always there. But the problem is when we then set those in stone as if that was the whole picture. Yeah, the chapter on the wild and queer kingdom, it's been, I think it's the chapter, not surprisingly, that people either really like or find problematic. So I've had some people say, wow, this is great, this is the best. And other people, well, I actually haven't had the people coming to me saying, this is a problem, but I can perceive that there would be some people that are frightened by the whole concept of queerness. And I really try to explain it there in terms of the evolutionary process, as that the evolutionary process, even, I mean, this the scientists are saying that it doesn't just come up with one thing or with binaries. It comes up with all these things, even within a species, that it's never been true that you can say this is how everybody behaves in this species. It's always been true that there's a range of different, in all species, including the human species, that there's a range of behaviors, a range of and this is in regard to sexuality, is the specific element that we usually talk about when we talk about queer, but it is in all aspects of behavior that it's always more various, more diverse, and that's actually healthier.
Mm-hmm.
Like even the natural selection, if you just take natural selection, Darwin's natural selection, very literally, it would sound like, let's say, the only wolves that would survive would be the most ferocious wolves, because they can kill their enemies and can get more meat or whatever. But it actually turns out that there is a place within the wolf society for very gentle wolves and for exploratory wolves, and for wolves of different that have different personalities, you want to say that, or characteristics, different behavioral characteristics. And so evolution doesn't just work in making everything alike. It works by diversifying, and that's true physically, but it's also true culturally and socially. But it's very, very hard, especially once we get, as you say, something embedded in culture, that it's very hard to open our minds beyond that. And certainly in regard to sexuality, there's been a huge movement within our own culture just in especially the last 10 or 15 years, to a much greater openness to queerness and to the recognition of and the acceptance of diversity, but obviously that movement is not complete. There's still a lot of reaction of the desire to reimpose the binaries. I mean, the other piece of that chapter that people either find great or disturbing is raising these questions about Jesus. And first calling God non-binary, I guess that might not be quite so controversial, but I mean, it would be with some people who think that God is male. But if you've gotten beyond thinking God is male, then to say God is non-binary is not such a big stretch. But to say that Jesus has some qualities, at least, of being non-binary, not necessarily, or not, I should say, he did not have the qualities of being non-binary in the sense that some people are living that today, where they literally live manifesting, you could say, qualities that usually identified with both sexes or with and so on. That he was clearly identified as male within his culture, and in many regards did live that identity. I mean, that is but he also was very free of it. And in some ways that would have been, or that were shocking within his own time, he rejected the cultural norms of masculinity. And those, sometimes we don't recognize quite how shocking those were, because they aren't as shocking maybe in our time, or we've heard the story so many times that it doesn't seem shocking.
Right.
But it was genuinely very, very extraordinary that he was able to, or that he chose to live in a way that transcended the cultural binary in that sense. So anyway, yeah. I think I do think it's a key element in our time, and it like I said, it's a difficult one for many people, but the full acceptance of or as you say, the moving beyond the cultural categories that we try to impose, and simply being with, accepting, recognizing, and even celebrating the diversity. And that's as I said, we can find the basis for that even in the scientific understanding of evolution. So it's not just a cultural idea to be that diversity is good. I mean, that there really is a far more solid basis to it, that diversity is real. It's the way the world works. It's the way God created the world, and it's a better world when there is diversity, and when that is able to manifest itself fully.
And many would say even that diversity is our strength.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I realize that I think we've gone over our time, but I want to thank you for this conversation, Mary.
Thank you,
very much.
Toni.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Your questions are really good.
Thank you. It was fun poring over them with you.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you so much, ladies, in just stretching our minds and stretching our hearts and souls about what is it to be a human. And I will just say the thing that got to me was that we have a human instinct. And what was the instinct? To just as humans, we have an instinct. Now I've lost. But that just like animals, we have specific instincts as a species and as a human. And that makes me feel more grounded in the fact that I am a human being, and that there are certain aspects of my endeavor, which is to look, I think you talk about it later, the learning, the longing and the yearning that humans have, and it doesn't go away, towards freedom. So that seems so appropriate in our world at this very moment. And I will now ask everyone to be just very open to their our having a small group together. And it's going to be groups of 3. There might be one that's 4 for 5 minutes each sharing. And very open-ended question. What is opening up for you? What is flourishing and what is rich for you in your heart? In your heart, rather than intellectual or cognitive. I mean, what is it that's kind of stuck that you would say is you felt it in your body? And I'd love you all to be able to share that with your colleagues or your heart lovers, as it came to me this morning, to say, share that with each other. And I will set up the breakout rooms at the moment. So here's the question again. What is opening up for you? Toni, maybe you could type that in to the chat because you're good at that. What is opening up for you? Thank you. And it'll just take me a moment to set up the breakout rooms, which shouldn't be very complicated. There they are. They moved. So I'm going to pause. Wait.
This meeting is being recorded.
What, Dave?
Do we end at 5:30?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because we were confused about the time.
Yeah. It's an hour and a half. 4 to 5:30. So we have time. We have about 10 minutes of time to see if there's any questions. And Mary's going to do those. I'm going to put the spotlight on her. And then go ahead, Mary, say what you'd like to do about the questions.
Yeah, I think people can either put the question in the chat, which I have open, so hopefully I'll see it. Or if you want to raise your hand, I'm not, that'll be the other question, is how I see people if they raise their hand, but anyway.
Yeah, it's in under the open reactions panel, open reactions button. So I'm going to raise my hand right now. There.
Okay.
And so the offering is that also ask your question in person.
Okay, well, just raise your hand without putting in the hand signal.
No, because it's too hard for us to see with this spotlight thing. So
okay, how do you do the hand signal?
Okay, do you have a question, Dave?
Yes.
Okay, why don't you say it right now?
Okay. Mary, I love your book. I've read the whole thing and now I'm going back and reading all my underlined parts. It takes more than one reading to get it all. So thank you. My question on page 105, I just want to read this one sentence because it set me thinking about something. If sexuality is a sexuality is a constitutive dimension of being human. That really jumped out at me because in the seminary and priesthood, our sexuality was never talked about. It was denied as an important constituent of being human. We were taught to, to sacrifice our sexuality in order to fulfill our calling to holy orders. And your sentence makes perfect sense to me now as a psychotherapist, but I still don't hear it very much in the church's teachings. And I just wondered if we could get it that there's grief attached to that statement because we didn't get our chance to experience sexuality as a legitimate and wonderful constituent of our humanness. And I'm not blaming the church or the seminary, but I'm just lamenting it.
Yeah.
And I wondered if you had any comments on that.
No, I think you said it very, very well. That unfortunately, even today, I think in many, especially the diocesan seminaries, sexuality is dealt with very poorly, and certainly one aspect of that is significant. It is well known that a significant number of people who are feel called to the priesthood are gay and can be wonderful priests, but especially in the diocesan seminaries, they have to completely hide that, or maybe they don't even fully recognize it themselves because they're not permitted to think about it, and that is really a tragedy for themselves and for the people of God that they can't come to the wholeness of who they are. I mean, I think religious life, I think, is doing a better job than it did in the past. Probably still could do even better, but is certainly doing better than the diocesan setting. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
I think Ray O'Connor had his hand up.
I did. Thank
Yeah.
you. And thank you, David, for that question, because I found your chapter 5 to be very heart-opening. So thank you for writing that. But my question is, and we were talking about this in our small group with, I can remember, Noel was one of them, and I think Julie was the other one, St. Louis Associates. And I brought up the Alfred Peacock, the biochemist, Anglican priest, thought.
Right.
And I want you, this whole part idea of creation, the whole and the part, where these gaps in being exist. Like, me and any human being can't know everything about creation, right? It's just too vast and too big for me to grasp it all. So I can understand the whole and the part. I'm a part. It's hard to get the whole. But Arthur Peacock's position is that God, on that holistic, that whole level, does in fact interact with the world and impact upon it, but not on the individual part, so that my free will is not impinged upon, is not subjugated to God's will, but God allows me to continue to choose. My job, I think, is to choose according to that divine will. And that's the difficult thing to get to. But here's the hopeful thing, that if Arthur Peacock is right, God is indeed influencing indirectly, in a holistic way, my ability to get to his will.
Yeah.
So talk about that.
Yeah, well, this is one of the huge theological questions, and I am not totally expert on this question by any means, but the question of how do we envision God as acting in the world? Because the simplistic or naive way is that, God puts God's finger down and something happens. I mean, the interventionist concept is is the easiest one for us to imagine. So theologians have various ways of trying to say that God doesn't do that, and God doesn't manipulate the world, and God does not control, but how then can God act? Because our concept, our theological concept, is that God is not just sort of passively present, but is in some way actively alive in our lives and our world. Of course, the first thing that we have to say is that God is not a part of the world. God is not a part of creation, and therefore God, however God operates, it isn't like a part of the created world, which means that we can't really imagine how God works, because of course the only things that we know are things that are part of the created world. So it's a difficult question, and many different, there's lots and lots of debate, and very heavy books written about this. And Peacock is just one, but I liked his way of saying it, and especially because he is both a scientist and a theologian. And so, yeah, just as you have said, that God, who is not, even when we say the whole, we sort of imagine something very big. And of course, God is not just something very big. God is something other than that. God is more than just something very big. And so God is present to everything, and God is, if we understand God to be love, then God is lovingly present to everything, and in that way is influencing everything, but not in the way of controlling it or determining it, or preventing it from behaving in the way that it normally, things are working in the way that they are created to work. but God is lovingly present. But it is tricky. And again, I know that, this is why there are so many heavy books about this, and debate goes on, because it's very hard to articulate that in a way that fully says it properly.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks, Ray. And so provocative, and lots more to learn. Oh my gosh, I'm going to have to do a lot more effort. And yeah, I am on the third reading of Mary's book as well. And I've even written summaries, and she's using language that is understandable. But the concepts of grasping what this all is really riveting and fascinating. And I thank you so much. And obviously for Toni and Ray to hear from you all again, and from Dave. So this is, good company in which we are moving forward to try and better understand who we are and what God is. And just, simple questions like that. So Mary was offering us a prayer for our ending in our last 3 minutes. And she's going to screen share it. And I guess I'll go ahead and explain it, Mary. It's prayer to all our relatives from this beautiful Earth Prayers book that I have by the side of my bed, but Mary brought this up. And so Mary first, Toni second, Molly third will read a line, and then we invite all of you to answer, teach us, and show us the way. Can I just say, doesn't this really feel like a litany of to the earth? And so Mary, are you screen sharing?
Yes, can you see it?
Yes, I do see it. You're
Yes.
right. Great.
What did you say the order of readers was?
Is Mary will do number 1. We call upon the earth. You're second.
Okay.
I'm third. So everyone unmute themselves. We'll hear our voices together in our presence to this beautiful and lovely prayer that we can hear and say together. And it may sound a little cacophonous, but I think that's some of the point. Okay, Mary, do you want to start?
We call upon the earth, our planet home, with its beautiful depths and soaring heights, its vitality and abundance of life. And together we ask that it
Teach
Teach
us
us and
and
show
show
us
us
the
the
way.
way. We call upon the mountains, the Rockies and the Appalachians, the high green valleys and meadows filled with wildflowers, the snows that never melt, the summits of intense silence, and we ask that they
Teach us
and
show us the way.
We call upon the waters that rim the earth horizon to horizon, that flow in our rivers and streams, that fall upon our gardens and fields. And we ask that they
teach
Teach
us
us
and
and show us
the way.
way.
Mary.
Call upon the land which grows our food, the nurturing soil, the fertile fields, the abundant gardens and orchards, and we ask that they
Teach us
and
show us the
way.
We call upon the forests, the great trees reaching strongly to the sky with earth in their roots and the heavens in their branches, the oak, the pine, the hickory, and the redwood. And we ask them to teach us, show us the way.
way. We call upon the creatures of the fields and forests and the lakes. Our brothers and sisters, the foxes and deer, the eagle and dove, the trout and bass, all our sisters and brothers who share our earth home, we ask them to
Teach us and show us the way.
And lastly, we call upon all that we hold most sacred, the presence and power of the great spirit of love and truth, which flows through all the universe, to be with us, to teach us.
And show us the way.
It's a Chinook. Oh,
Yeah, it's
that
the
was
Chinook
the
prayer.
tribe of the woman who had
So it's a beautiful prayer for us. And I thank everyone for their participation. And I think that, tears are entirely appropriate to the emotion. And I always have to kind of explain, yeah, I will cry at any time that my heart is moved. And it's taken many years to get there, but it's liberating. So I welcome you in accepting the beautiful language that we've heard today and the wonderful, loving embrace that is holding us in this endeavor to understand more how we are human and how we are in relationship with God, our Creator. And I and all of us will see you in 3 weeks after just coming down from how beautiful this has been. And I thank you for being, and this is, if we do this, we can touch each other a little bit, through these screens. It's just crazy. Thank you for your community and your life and your community.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Molly.
You're
Thanks
very-
so much, Molly, and
Bye.
Thank you.
very, very great, Toni. So
Sis,
thank
you
you.
can go to
Thank you.
dinner.
What?
You can go to dinner, sis.
I have it here. I have my peanut butter sandwich.
Okay.
Bye,
Thank
Ginny.
you.
Bye,
Bye.
Ginny. You get to say goodbye to her. Oh, lovely. Lovely. Thanks, sis, for coming and working it all out. And thanks, Joan, for coming. Oh, there's Ginny. Hi, Ginny.
Where's Jenny? I don't know.
There she's- yeah, it should show if you do gallery view rather than speaker view. You will see Ginny sitting in the parlor. Yeah. There, sis. You are in the same
see.
building.
Yes, thank
Most
you.
people have left.
Yes.
Thank you, Lucy. Nice.
Thank
Nice to
you.
see you. Nice to meet you. And
Nice to see you too. And we're at opposite ends of the continent.
exactly.
John and I had our dinner 2 hours ago.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, for heaven's
It's
sakes.
It's 8:30 here in Massachusetts.
Well, glad you got your dinner early enough. Thank you, Sheila, for working this out. And
Yes,
maybe-
thank you so much. Sheila, thank you. My goodness. I didn't have any trouble, but I was diverted to not have trouble, which is great. Thank you.
All right. I'll see you in 3 weeks. Love to you all.
Okay, great.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thanks for coming.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome.